God make a world where there is no evil? They don't think, well, can he do that? Is that something God can logically actualize without getting into absurdities, right?
Such a thing is an absurdity? Heaven is supposed to be a place where people have free will but do not sin. Heaven, therefore, is an absurdity. Got it. If God can't make heaven, it's an absurdity. Where are you going when you die, Mary Jo Sharp? Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. In making last week's video, one apologist, Lewis included, that I had never heard of was Mary Jo Sharp. Mary Jo Sharp is another Christian with a former atheist backstory. She grew up in a secular home and at some point in her life converted to Christianity. She says she did so because of the wonder of nature and because a friend gave her a Bible and urged her to read it, which she did, and found it to be more fact-centered than the mythologies that she was familiar with. Conspicuously absent from the story is how old she was when this happened. She gives no context of being when she was a young married, when she was a college student, or still in high school. So I dug deeper and found an interview that Sharp did with the C.S. Lewis Institute. Here she reveals who gave her the Bible and how old she was, and it becomes obvious why this was left out of the story. Sharp was given a Bible by her band director in a public school, who told her that he had a burden for her, and he felt he really needed to share his faith with her. Talk about being both inappropriate and illegal. She says she was a senior at the time, and he told her to read the Bible in college. Why not just wait until she graduates to do that? Then there's no disparity of power, no overbearing from a person in authority. She also never refers to him as her teacher, but that's what he was, her teacher. Mary Jo's story has similar elements to mine. I also was raised in a secular home, for the most part, and converted to Christianity as a teenager. I was 16. I was in the faith for 42 years, finding my way out of the maze at 58. I can't find how old Sharp is. One website said she was born in 74, in which case she would be 51. There's hope for her to find reason, but not much. Not much because Sharp runs the ministry Confident Christianity. Her husband is a full-time pastor. Both their livelihoods depend on their remaining in the faith. So that's a little bit about Mary Jo Sharp. In this video, she tackles the problem of evil on the channel Unbelievable. She is interviewed by Justin Brierley. Can she do it? Will she even get to the full problem?
Well, I'm joined again on today's show by Mary Jo Sharp, who is an assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University and founder of the Confident Christianity Apologetics Ministry.
Just a note, Sharp is not listed as a professor at Houston Christian University on the pages of their apologetics program. Searching for her name as faculty gives you this page, where she is definitely called a professor there, but there is only a video here, no list of any classes that she teaches. Unlike Mike Lycona, who is listed in the personnel directory and it shows what classes he teaches. It's kind of weird.
Because these are really well-produced videos on all kinds of themes that frequently pose questions and objections, especially to young people. And we're going to be talking about one of the videos which is on the issue of suffering, which obviously is an issue that everyone grapples with at some point in their life. Mary.
Indeed, suffering is a part of life, something one would expect in a random, undesigned world, not what one would expect in a world made by an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving God.
I mean, starting again on a personal level, has this been a kind of significant objection for you that you've had to kind of work through in your own life?
Yeah, definitely. In two different ways. I have the first way is that I have a very strong sense of morality, and even as an atheist. And so it was hard for me to justify that in a universe void of good and evil.
Why would she think the universe was void of good and evil? Good and evil are in plain sight in the world every day. What on earth gave her the idea that the universe was void of good and evil, especially as she said that she had a strong sense of morality as an atheist? Though I think the term used for her by the C.S. Lewis Institute was more accurate. Apatheism. She simply never thought about faith.
Or any, objective basis for that.
Oh, an objective-based good and evil. Okay, have you found one? It can't be your God. He is subjective, and any morality from that God would be, by definition, subjective.
So this has been a search for myself in coming to Christianity and coming back around to belief after I doubted what I believed. So that's one part of it. And then the other part was the hurt, the painful experiences of being in the church myself. So that part of it, I sort of naively expected coming into Christianity to find people who were all like the best at searching for the good, true, and beautiful God. And they would be conforming their lives to Christ-likeness and the first people to admit that they're wrong. I'm an idealist. And so there was a lot of naivety on my part. And that combined with the vices of people in the church, it's sort of like the perfect storm.
Indeed, the Bible claims that when one believes, one is changed. The old man is put off and the new man is put on. Yet when you go to church, it's full of people just like the people on the outside. There is no difference between believers and unbelievers when it comes to morality. Yet Sharp doesn't look at the failures of the Bible promises and instead blames the people. Some of them just aren't very good Christians, but that shouldn't spoil it for the theology. She needs to look at how the data, the behavior of the people in the church, lines up with the theology. It doesn't. But instead of seeing the obvious flaw in the theology, she blames the people. She blames the data. Because of course the Bible can't possibly be wrong. The church must be filled up with poor examples of believers. Where are the real believers, if any? If the church is full of frauds that you are hoping to convert, how is that working out for you?
There was a lot of pain from that and hurt at the hands of Christians. So dealing with my own suffering in the church has been part of my journey. Yeah.
I hope she plans to expand on that.
Well, maybe we'll come back to that towards the end of our conversation.
Which means I may or may not cover it, depending on how long this gets before we get there.
Tell us about this particular story. I'll give the sort of the précis that is given on the website itself. This is episode 7. Max Wants to End It All, it's titled. For years, Max has bottled up his pain, angry at God for allowing him to suffer childhood abuse. But one day, a friend gives Max a gift, and it transforms the way he sees his suffering and the world. Why don't we just hear a little bit of this video now, and then we'll talk about it.
I'm going to edit down the video. It's an impassioned, emotional plea from Max for help. I'll give you just a bit of it.
God, why do I feel this way? I don't have anyone that understands. If you love me, why do I feel this pain all the time?
Indeed. Does Max have a guardian angel that was sleeping on the job? A God that has the power to prevent cruelty to children, but chooses instead to stand by and watch is not a good God. Even if that God weeps with Max over his suffering, but had the power to prevent it and chose not to, and even now has the power to heal these emotional wounds, but chooses not to, is not a good God. How about you, Mary Jo? Allegedly, you have the power to heal Max. Have you done it? If not, why not? I'm sure Sharp is going to bring up free will. It's the go-to argument. But even if that were the answer as to why God allowed the abuse to occur, it is no excuse as to why he fails to heal Max now. Whose free will is violated if God sends Max the help that he needs? Seriously, how could that possibly interfere with anyone's free will? You could make the argument that since God allowed the abuse, he has to also allow the consequences of that abuse. And if that's the case, there should be no Christian counselors or even doctors for that matter. They're all interfering with the free will consequences of someone's behavior, or worse, a disease that God gave someone for a purpose. If humans are permitted to interfere with free will, why not God? Why has God tied his arms behind his back, relegated to a position of just hoping that a human will step in and do something as he is powerless to act?
Around a particular individual and their particular struggle. So what's the kind of the basics of the story in this case, Mary Jo?
Yeah, so the title gives it away. Max wants to end it all. We have a main character who, his abuse happened when he was still a baby in the womb. And so he was very vulnerable. And that led him to have some disability in his life for which he gets made fun of and bullied. And so he gets to a point where he doesn't understand what he's, what is the meaning of his life? Why is he here? Does he matter?
All very good questions. Since the abuse occurred in the womb, I'm guessing the mother was on drugs or he was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. I'm confused as to why these would lead to being bullied in school, but the question of whether or not his life matters seems separate. That's a more existential crisis. His pain likely contributes to the crisis, but the crisis is another matter, requiring professional help. I hope he got some, and not just someone telling him that Jesus will make him all better, because Jesus won't. Or Jesus will give meaning to his life. No, Jesus won't. The man might find purpose in his life through his religious faith, but that is still him finding his purpose, not Jesus giving him one.
And he feels that it would be better if he had never existed. So he wants to just end it.
The lack of empathy Sharp displays makes me think he might just be an actor, not someone telling their own story. Certainly not anyone that Sharp knows personally.
And Max has sort of an epiphany moment of, like you said, I'm trying not to give it all away, but he sort of has an epiphany moment that his life does matter. And that it sort of comes through him understanding that he has things he can add. He has value, and he can add to the community of human beings in a valuable way.
No, Jesus will fix you. Rather, the same advice any secular counselor would give.
That his life isn't wasted or meaningless, that it has purpose, and he can show redemptive love to others, even though he did not have that shown to him.
Redemptive love? Now we smuggle in the apologetics. But think about what Sharp just said. Max was not given redemptive love. From whom, according to the Christian faith, is redemptive love supposed to originate? Isn't it God? Did Sharp just admit that her God failed Max?
So it's a very difficult episode, I would say, and I would prepare yourself and also prepare your student ministry that we're going to work through a difficult episode. But I think it's so important to do that.
So these are supposed to be aimed at students. She's not wrong. It's good to talk to teens about feelings because they all have them. If I had been told that and how to handle an existential crisis, I probably would not be the way I am today. I'm a loner. I don't seek social engagement, and I can be socially awkward. I am content to be alone, especially on the beach, in the warm sun with a good book.
And if any preacher wants to connect at a very deep level with people in their congregation, you can simply talk about suffering, because everyone has their own story, don't they? And it might be different to Max's, but certainly everyone will have, has something, some kind of injustice in their life, something where they've had to work through something that they've gone through.
And this makes me think that they may be limiting themselves to talking about suffering caused by people. That is certainly a lot of the suffering in the world, but it isn't the only suffering. There is natural suffering, suffering from natural events like hurricanes and wildfires. And sure, some wildfires are intentionally set by humans. Most of them are not. Most are entirely natural. Acts of God is how they were characterized in the insurance industry. At least, that's what we called them when I worked there, which was some time ago. And of course, there's animal suffering unrelated to any human activity. Animal suffering that existed before humans existed. The K2 extinction event sure as hell wasn't caused by anyone's free will act.
To that extent, I can imagine this is the kind of episode where, yes, it's going to stir up a lot of kind of potential feelings and emotions in a lot of people. It's not just an intellectual issue in that sense. It's very much something that touches people at a deep level, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
As well it should. I find disturbing Sharp's lack of emotional reaction to Max and to the topic.
And we try to balance that in the episode. We try to offer some resource as far as an answer, but we also acknowledge that it's not going to make everything better, that it doesn't just make all the hurt and pain go away, just because we can provide, maybe this is why there's evil in the world. And so we're very cautious to not wrap it up real tidy and neatly.
If that's the best you can do, offer a reason why there might be pain and evil in the world, your religion has no value. If you can't offer hope, healing, and empathy, your religion is empty. Your Bible even has a verse about this. The verse talks about not feeding and housing the hungry and cold person, but this is no different. Imagine being in a car accident and the paramedics arrive to see you writhing in pain. They look at your leg and tell you that your leg is broken, and then they leave. They've told you why you are suffering. Your leg is broken, but they have left you to continue suffering. This is the value of you telling people why they are suffering. It is pitiful.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're in that situation, maybe you're working through issues that people have, and sometimes it takes a while, I think, in conversations or in ministry to sometimes get down to the real issues when it comes to the issue of pain and suffering, because it's often presented as an intellectual issue, but very often I think it goes alongside often people's own personal experiences of pain and suffering or rejection or whatever it might be.
Byerly isn't wrong. For some, it's a deeply personal issue. But where the theology is of no value is in the realm of the intellectual. The pain and suffering that none of us have ever experienced. The pain and suffering that existed before humans existed.
And to that extent, what do you find is a helpful way into these kinds of conversations when you're, maybe starting to broach this subject with someone who says, well, this is the reason I don't believe. Why would a good God allow such and such? Where do you tend to begin with that kind of conversation, Mary Jo?
Yeah, it's always different with each person who talks to me.
That's a good sign. If you have a set script, it doesn't always work. You see this from callers all the time on the line when they call in with a script and the atheists don't give them the answers they are expecting. Suddenly they don't know what to do.
Some people are grieving, lamenting life experiences. And so I'm there to listen and be more of a counselor, be a person who is okay with where they're at.
Are you a licensed counselor? It sure isn't listed in your bio. Better call yourself a life coach, not a counselor, as you don't have the credentials.
So that's an important part of this. The other times, I'll get that, but I might also get, they're looking for answers. And so I sort of probe, well, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a response? Are you looking for answers? And if they say yes, then I can start asking them some questions about their view of why there's evil in the world, why they're asking the question they're asking. Are they angry with God? There's some things that I can, it comes down to asking questions, a lot of questions about where they're at and why they're asking that.
Again, good, but are we going to get any answers to any aspect of the question?
When I get permission, I can go into more of an explanation.
Again, good. She waits for permission. She doesn't force her ideas on an unwilling audience, unlike so many other apologists. Maybe she's one of the better ones. The big question is, what about situations where her answers don't work?
So I will say something like, well, do you need answers or do you need a hug? And I've had people say both. I'll take a little bit of each. And in that case, I can say, well, here's what I think. Here's what I believe about the situation. And I can talk a little bit. Maybe I offer them a little bit of a free will defense. Maybe I offer them a little bit of the creation story about how there's evil in the world and why it's here.
And neither one of these is an answer to natural evil. or evil that existed before man existed. And even if this were a fallen world with evil being caused by man, it still doesn't explain why God is so inept at doing anything about it. Worse, your God is supposed to be the omnipotent creator. He supposedly knew that if he made the world, this is how it would turn out. Then, knowing the amount of evil that would result and that his hands would be tied by human free will, he chose to make the world anyway. Why? Was this the best he could do? If so, you really need to stop calling him omnipotent. Could he not make a world with, say, 1% less suffering? Could he make a world where if an animal is caught with no hope of escape, it immediately dies, instead of suffering the agonizing death of being eaten alive? Can your God not do this? If he can't, he's not omnipotent. If he can, he's not good. He could make a world with less suffering, but he chooses not to. I'd like to hear Mary Jo explain that one.
Something like that. I try not to go too far until I see where they're at. But yeah, I'll offer them a little bit about my belief if I'm given that sort of permission. Yeah, that's okay. That's what I need. And I've found that it's received very well. They don't always agree with me, but they'll receive it well when you step in there in a gentle and charitable manner.
She's not wrong. I'd like to have her as a guest on my show, but I know that will never happen. Despite her talking about sharing her faith with people who disagree with her, the point of her ministry, like most ministries, is to give confidence to the believer, not to sway the atheist. In her testimony, it wasn't any argument that swayed her. It was her wonder at nature and thinking that a God must have made it all. I get that. That was the biggest fear that I had as a new atheist, that I would no longer be able to enjoy the wonder of nature, knowing it wasn't created by a God. But my experience was the opposite. Sharp says she grew up watching a lot of Carl Sagan. How did she miss how much he marveled at the wonders of the universe? No God needed.
When it comes to, I suppose, the most obvious question really, if someone simply said, I'm suffering, I have, perhaps it's some kind of a physical issue that they've been suffering with all their life. And they say, you believe in a God who could heal someone, a God who does heal people, and a God who can do anything in principle. I've prayed, I've asked, why isn't it happening to me?
I would expand on Byerly's question. According to the Bible, and if the Bible contains the words of Jesus, then according to Jesus, both of them have this healing power. If they only have faith, they can cure anyone of anything. Okay, it doesn't say anything, but it does say that they should be able to do greater miracles than those done by Jesus. And yet, few Christians claim to have such powers. Why not? Do you not believe in your own theology? Next, why would God choose to heal one person and not another? What happened to God not showing favoritism? As soon as you say that God had a purpose in healing one person and not another, I'm going to bring out the children suffering from cancer. No theological purpose can justify doing that to a child. If your God can't find another way to communicate the theology he wants people to follow, your God isn't worth following.
I mean, again, everybody's different, and there's going to, the answer might vary, obviously, depending on the individual standing in front of you. But in general terms, where would you begin with someone who's maybe coming with that kind of a problem or a question about God?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'm going to tell them is, I don't know why you personally are suffering.
At least that's an honest answer, even if it isn't helpful.
I don't have access to that kind of knowledge.
Why not? You are supposed to be a follower of a God that knows all things. Allegedly, you speak to this God and he speaks to you, no? If he can speak to you, he can tell you the answer, right? So why doesn't he? He has the answers and refuses to reveal them. This was one of the first things I reflected on after my deconversion. What happened all the times that God allegedly spoke to me? When I did, I could not come up with a single one where God said something to me that I didn't already know. In all the times that God supposedly spoke to me or answered my prayers, never did I see anything that could not have happened in the exact same way had I not prayed. Nowhere in my life was there evidence of God having done anything. Have you ever thought about that, Mary Jo? You are supposed to have all the wisdom of the ages available to you for the asking, and yet you cannot get God to give you anything that you don't already know. Why do you suppose that is?
And I think that's important to tell people, because a lot of times Christians come off like, I mean, we'll just download some theodicy on them or some philosophical problem of evil as if we understand why that individual is suffering.
She's right. There are some excusagists that do that. Excusagists are people too. They come in all varieties.
I want to make sure they know first, since we're talking about beginnings here, that I don't know why they're suffering. I don't have that answer, and I won't have access to understand that. So I'll let them know that.
So you start by telling them that you have nothing. Where is there to go from here?
Then I say, I do have some theories about, could God logically actualize a world in which he gives humans freedom, but they never do anything wrong?
The answer to that should be yes. If your God really is all-powerful, this should be inside of his abilities. She's already destroyed her own theology, but we'll give her a bit more rope before tying that one off.
I don't think that's a world God can logically actualize. What does that mean? So, then we get into that conversation. So I'll say things like that, but, and people want to engage that because that's not something that comes out of their high school education, or a lot of times they haven't encountered any of these arguments in their college education. So these are new conversations to them. All they've heard are these sort of sound bites like, well, why didn't God make a world where there is no evil?
Okay, I thought she was going to go into that, but I guess this interview is just a surface level interview about what she does without any actual arguments. So here we go. Can God actualize? Translation, create. She uses a fancy word likely to try to sound like she knows what she's talking about. Just like Turek likes to trip students up by telling them they have an epistemological problem, not an exegetical problem.
I know something's called epistemology, but the object you're knowing deals with ontology.
And with that, he can trip the student up and dodge the question that he was asked and take control of the conversation. Can God create a world where he gives humans freedom, but they never do anything wrong? Sharp says that isn't possible. Mary Jo, have you ever heard of heaven? Heaven is supposed to be a place where humans have freedom. The freedom to worship God continually. The freedom to love God. And they never do anything wrong. There is no sin in heaven. God can't make that? God can't make heaven? Where is it that you think you will go when you die? Back to earth to start over? You just die and it's the end? You obviously can't go to heaven as you don't think it's possible for your God to make such a place.
They don't think, well, can he do that? Is that something God can logically actualize without getting into absurdity?
Such a thing is an absurdity? Heaven is an absurdity. Got it.
Right. So those are, presenting those kinds of situations to people help them to think, wow, I've never encountered that idea before.
How about this, Mary Jo? Could God have made the exact world that he created minus the tree with the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil? Man would never have eaten the fruit, and evil would never have entered the world. You might argue that man would have found another way to sin, but how could he? He has no knowledge of good and evil. Next problem in your storybook, the snake enters the world and allegedly lies to deceive Eve. This was the first sin in the world. Clearly evil was there before humans ever did anything wrong. Have you, Mary Jo, ever encountered that idea before?
Maybe it is true that our freedom, which gives us real choice to really love whomever we want, to truly and freely love people, including the eternal God of the universe, maybe that is something that, is in place so that we have that opportunity.
Do we, though? Is there any kind of opportunity for a free will choice to love your God? The first problem with this idea is divine hiddenness. If your God wants me to love him, he has to show up and participate in the relationship. You can tell me about your God all day, and I can't know him and love him until I actually meet him. The second problem is hell. As long as hell exists, if it does Mary Jo believe in hell? If hell is real and one escapes hell by loving and accepting Jesus, then no one can choose Jesus freely with that threat of eternal torture hanging over their heads. Love me or die is not a free will choice. Finally, there is the problem of free will even existing in a world made by an omniscient creator God. If this God knows all that you will do before he makes you, you cannot make any free will choice. Any choice you make was known to him before you existed, and you had no choice but to choose as he knew you would choose. I know that's confusing. Think of it this way. If I make a computer game, the NPCs can only do what I programmed them to do. If I want them to do something differently, I need only program them differently. From the perspective of the NPC, they might feel they are choosing to do or say what they choose, but they are not. They are doing and saying what I programmed them to say. I don't think any God has programmed humans to run through a simulation for him, though I wouldn't put it past the God of the Bible. If God existed, you cannot make any choice that God not only knew in advance, but knew even before you existed, which means that when he made you, all your choices had to be preordained by this God. There can be no free will with an omniscient creator God.
But the downside, the bad side, or the evil side of that, if you Star Wars fans will forgive me, the dark side of that is that there is opportunity there as well to hate and to do great harm from that gift of freedom.
Sure, but could God not make humans unable to do that? Make them able to want to do harm but unable to do it? Sort of like he can want good things to happen but he's unable to bring that about?
Yeah. I mean, it is always harder. And I mean, that's often where I would go with someone, you know, especially when it comes to injustices people have suffered. It is, you know, the problem is if God simply made everyone do the right thing, we would obviously live in a world where there wasn't free will and we were all just puppets, and you know, no one could freely give or receive love and all the rest of it.
Why? Could God not make a world where there was no evil and yet people were still able to love? Didn't he allegedly do exactly that? Isn't Adam supposed to have loved Eve from the moment he met her, despite not having the ability to do evil because he had no knowledge of good and evil? He also had no knowledge of good either. How was he able to do a good thing and love Eve? Aren't people supposed to be able to continue to love God in heaven, despite there being no evil? Your theology has so many contradictions that it is hopeless. You really need to think through your answers and how they impact other aspects of your theology.
But I think it is that bit harder, isn't it, when it comes to the problem of natural evil and why disease and, you know, natural disasters befall people and that kind of thing. Where do you go with that kind of that sort of a problem where it's not so easy necessarily to point to the freedom that people exert as the source of the kind of where the evil might come from?
Excellent question. I was afraid you were just going to ignore this.
Yeah, there are so many responses to this one. Well, it could be that natural evil is not definitionally a thing, because evil is defined, it's a moral issue, and that has to go with a will. So is a hurricane evil? Is it naturally evil?
Regardless of whether or not a hurricane is evil, it causes suffering. Are you going to address the suffering it causes or dismiss that suffering because it wasn't caused by evil? But if your theology is correct, the hurricane itself may not be evil, but sending the hurricane to cause the deaths of hundreds of children would be. If your God is in control, then he sent the hurricane. Is this not evil? Is this not an evil act? If it isn't, then you again dismantle your own theology, making your God a mere bystander when the hurricane comes, having nothing to do with its creation or any control over it. Either that, or you redefine evil to exclude killing children by means of a violent and painful death by drowning.
Well, that's a tough one, definitionally, because I don't know that it can be naturally evil. It's something that happens in our world, and we can take measures for to protect people. So we can build structures that are better protected from that, or we cannot build in areas where people experience those things. So that's one.
That doesn't cut it. Maybe you can avoid living on the coast and avoid hurricanes, but tornadoes go anywhere, as do earthquakes. Wildfires have been getting so bad that the air quality is affected hundreds of miles away, to include people who don't live anywhere near a forest. It simply isn't possible to find a place to live that is risk-free of natural disaster. Flooding is another. Waterways are part of life. We need water to live. We can't avoid all areas with water and still survive. If your God made this world, he did a bad job of it.
Another one is that the freedom of people to make these choices to do evil is actually interacting with the physical. That's another theory on this, in that, the whole earth is groaning in anticipation of the release from its bondage, right, to our evil.
Is your theory that floods, earthquakes, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, and so forth didn't exist until sin entered the world? There's a lot of geologic evidence that would beg to differ. I don't see how any rational person can hang the K2 extinction event as being the fault of man when people didn't exist for another 65 million years.
So we get that out of the Bible, that we are sort of the cause of all this. And you see that, the immaterial interacting with material, and as far as like our anxiety and stress, and our emotions can actually end up killing us, harming us.
How did we get here? We're talking about natural disasters, and you were trying to tell us why natural disasters are the fault of man. And your conclusion is, we can kill ourselves by stressing ourselves out. Okay, but what does that have to do with the topic? Surely you aren't suggesting that human stress can cause a hurricane. Our emotions can't impact our environment. Ourselves, yes, but not the environment. If only we could impact the environment with our emotions. Imagine being able to love away climate change or a disaster or environmental waste. There was someone that came up with this idea. Elena Kucharik and Linda Denham came up with the Care Bears.
Care Bears, stare!
Mary Jo, if your God can do anything, why didn't he give us the power to love away all of the problems of the world? Now that would be a cool God.
Taking our physical life from us. So there is some kind of interaction. So those are two of sort of the thoughts that you can go on there. Maybe it's not something that is, we can definitely say is evil. But then again, maybe it is because of the great evil that this world is the way it is.
Grasping at straws there, aren't we? Hurricanes aren't evil, so technically they aren't part of the problem of evil. And maybe, technically, there's a cause and effect there, that a man who ate a piece of fruit a few thousand years ago might be the cause of a hurricane today. Another problem with that claim is there is no cause and effect there. Even if what Mary Jo said were true and hurricanes were a result of the fall, they would not be a direct result. The direct cause would be God cursing the earth, because he got mad about the fall that he himself orchestrated by making sure that the snake had access to the people and the people had access to the fruit. And not only did God orchestrate the fall, he is the direct cause of it. He knew that if he made this world, the fall would happen. He chose to make this world. Therefore, the fall happened. It was entirely in his power to do otherwise, but nope, this is the route he chose to go. Then, after the fall, he curses the world, causing it to groan. And if hurricanes are the result, then they are the result of God's curse, not of man's fall. Even if you claim that the curse is the result of man's fall, man is still not at fault for what God chooses to do as a result. It's like the guy that beats his wife and claims that she made him do it because she burned dinner. No sane person thinks that the wife getting beaten is her own fault, except often for her. Is this what we are witnessing in Christianity? A self-blaming mentality because it's been browbeaten into you? I can say from experience that that is exactly what I felt. Finally, the Bible passage that's sharp-sighted blames not man, but God, for the groanings of the earth. It says, "For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be set free from its enslavement to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God." The one who subjected it in hope is clearly not Adam, it's God. If the world is groaning, it's because God caused it. If hurricanes and other natural suffering are the result of the curse, it's directly caused by God.
Some people think God has put dangers into this world in order to develop human virtue. So that's not one that I tend to go with.
Good, because that one is ridiculous. Sure, there are some cases where suffering does cause greater good to result, but that doesn't justify kids with cancer. It doesn't justify kids dying from abuse. Glad you skipped that one.
But if you're interested in looking at that, soul-building theodicies are out there as well.
Yes, I mean, I suppose in a related way, people often point to the fact that actually often people are drawn to God rather than pushed away from God because of certain circumstances in their life that may be painful, and to that extent, as C.S. Lewis said, God uses pain as a megaphone to rouse a deaf world. There's a sense in which when we have a life that is incredibly comfortable, in a sense, it's easy to forget God. I don't know if that's a kind of an argument you would use, that there's a sort of a way in which, while God doesn't necessarily cause the suffering, he can nevertheless use it to bring people to a knowledge of himself.
Which would make your God a dick? If your God is completely capable of showing up and explaining who he is, which, according to your Bible, he is, he allegedly did just that for the Apostle Paul, and somehow Paul's free will seemed to remain intact. But for you, God sends cancer as his way of saying, look at me. Or he sends homelessness or drug addiction, just so you can look at him and say, oh, there is the guy that caused all my pain and suffering. I should love him and follow him for eternity. In what universe does that make sense? What does make sense is a suffering person in a vulnerable place, and a Christian church rallies around them to help them. They bring meals, they take you to the doctor, someone calls daily to see how you are, and so forth. This is where the Christian church excels, in providing community for one who needs community support. But there is nothing theological about it. Secular agencies do the same things. Friends do the same things. Humans are perfectly capable of working together to support each other without needing a God to cause a member to suffer. Unfortunately, too often we fail one another, both inside and outside of the church.
Yeah, that one's a tough one. It works for, I don't even know how to frame this. It's not lighter instances of evil. I don't want to say that. But when you get into horrific acts of evil, it's harder to use that one. Like in my course, at the university, we study some of the most horrific instances of evil. And yeah, it doesn't seem to like balance out there.
Yeah.
It seems to be more problematic at that point.
She's right. When I was struggling to hold on to my faith after the death of my firstborn, some well-meaning Christians told me that maybe God was trying to teach me something. I wanted to punch them in the nose. No lesson that God could teach me was worth the life of my child. My baby died in utero as the result of a cord accident. There was no evil involved, by Sharp's definition, but that is the most intense suffering that I have ever experienced. And I would like to remind our host that the topic here is supposed to be suffering, not evil. You can point to a moral issue in evil, but that isn't always the case with suffering.
So that's been one of the greatest objections to that sort of thinking. But yeah, he can, as you said, he doesn't cause it, but he can use it and make something from it so that it's not meaningless, right? And that's one of the things that we are concerned with is our pain and suffering meaningless?
Now Sharp has fallen off the bus. When my baby died, I sure as hell wasn't looking for meaning in her death. In fact, I even tried to go that route and failed miserably. Someone suggested to me that God needed babies in heaven too, so that's why my baby died. God needed another baby in heaven. To which I should have replied, didn't he get enough when he wiped out the Amalekites? Didn't he get enough when he flooded the world? If he really needs more babies in heaven, can't he just make them there? Aren't aborted fetuses supposed to go straight to heaven? And why would an all-powerful God have need of anything, let alone my baby? Yeah, that one doesn't cut it. Most people aren't looking for meaning in their suffering. not unless they are Christian and trying to find an excuse for their God behaving as the immoral monster that he allegedly is.
And so I'm going to kind of drive it back to our episode here on suffering for Darkroom.
Cool. We're going to return to the correct topic. They do remember what it was, don't they?
Is that what our character realizes is that it's not meaningless. That from his pain, he can provide beauty and love towards other people. And like I said earlier, he's very redemptive in how he treats others as he finds his way, because he realizes that that's what he should be doing.
Now I find Max's story to lack credibility. I find it hard to believe that a person who was subjected to the level of suffering he claims to have had is fine with his suffering because it caused him to have redemptive love towards other people in the name of Christianity, even though growing up, the Christian God had no redemptive love for him. I fail to see a reason in that, let alone a justification for the decades of suffering.
Which ultimately, I suppose, is a picture of Christ, who obviously suffered pain, suffering, humiliation, injustice, but was able to turn it in a redemptive way to, so I guess that's the central picture at the heart of Christianity in many ways.
I disagree, Justin. The difference is Jesus chose his suffering. He didn't have to endure any of it, according to the Bible. He could have called a legion of angels to take him off the cross if he wanted to. His suffering was entirely voluntary. I find voluntary suffering far easier to endure. When you know you can end it at any time, like a dental procedure. The dentist says if you need a break, just raise your hand. You not only know that what you are going through will have a good result in the end, I'm in control of the procedure. I can even end the procedure if I so desire. Not so with a hurricane. Not so with cancer. Not so with losing a loved one. These we cannot control or opt out of. Next, Jesus' suffering is entirely meaningless. If God wanted to forgive humanity, he could just forgive humanity. There was no need for the charade of Jesus' crucifixion. God has it in his power to forgive. He even says that he will have mercy on whom he has mercy. It does not say that he will have mercy on those that love him or those that believe in him. The whole story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is nonsense. Jesus is God. He's praying to himself and asking himself if he can bypass the cross, and then tells himself no, so he goes through with it. He could just as easily have declared the sins of the world forgiven and ended the story there. At all times, he controlled the narrative. He could make it whatever he wanted it to be.
Yeah, very much so. And that's one thing that cannot be left out of the conversation. Sometimes, I'll get into philosophy of the problem of evil, but ultimately, and I get into things like, well, what are you even calling evil if there's no standard of good by which you're saying something's evil? So I can go there.
Why do you think you have a corner on standards of good? Not only do you not, I question whether you even have a standard. If your standard of good is your Bible, God, your Bible is fine with women being forced to marry their rapists, either as war brides or as damaged goods, and a bride price is then paid by the rapist to the woman's father, not the woman. The woman has to marry the guy. This is immoral by any standard today. I'm sure that Mary Jo would say that forcing a woman to marry a man who violated her is immoral, so her moral guidelines do not line up with her Bible.
But ultimately, at the end, you're looking at a God who suffered and died on the cross. And then sort of Alvin Plantinga response, like a world with incarnation and atonement is greater, is a greater world. So there's a God who suffers with us and doesn't distance himself from us. He's not the deistic God who's just sort of a watcher in the background.
Sorry, I didn't catch the meaning there. How is a world with an incarnation and atonement greater? I fail to see any greatness in that. Sure, it would look that way if you believe in the Christian faith, but to anyone who doesn't already believe that, you've given us no reason that we should. I thought you were all about giving people a reason to believe.
And you fitted this all into a 15-minute video? Or not quite?
8. It's like an 8-minute, 8 or 10.
If she thinks she can solve the problem of suffering in an 8-minute video, she is deluded. Whole books have been written on the subject. She's very surface level here, going deep into no argument. I was all ready to do a deep dive on this subject, but no need. Sharp is a surface level apologist that sums up what you've heard 100 times and has nothing to add to it. Bummer. She was kind of nice for an apologist.
We did. We put it all in this short bit. No, I mean, it's more about the opening up the conversation. You and I have gone very, very deep, and I don't want to scare anybody off.
They've gone very, very deep? When? I seem to have missed it.
The video does not go that deep. It is more about the character's engagement with it. And we just very lightly introduce responses to the problem.
That's weird. The apologetics is shallower than the interview about the apologetic. She was starting to say that it's more about the characters, which confirms my suspicion that Max isn't a real person with real problems. He's an actor with a made-up story. Now Sharp's lack of empathy makes more sense. It would seem that the point is less about the apologetics and more about the emotional appeal. How typical of Christianity. When it comes to why we believe what we believe, we have little in the reason department, but look how much emotional appeal we can put into a fictional story. Not surprising. Look at all the emotional appeal they put into their Jesus story. So in summary, we got God can't control or help with evil because of free will. Natural disasters might be a result of the fall. God can't make a place where people have free will, but there is no sin, despite heaven supposedly being exactly that. Jesus suffered too, so somehow that makes it okay for God to allow or inflict suffering on people. I've yet to hear any rationale for an all-powerful God not being able to at least reduce the suffering in this world, nor did we hear any reason for suffering to exist before humans existed. I don't see any reason why I should believe. Live your life.